Hey, welcome back to the Downline podcast, where we hope to equip Christ followers to faithfully walk with Jesus while pouring their lives into others. Really excited to be joined by a friend of mine for almost 20 years now, a former Downline staffer, current pastor up in the DC area, Jason Seville. Jason, thanks for being with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, let's start here. Some people in the Downline community will still be familiar with you. Obviously, you still come in and teach the divided kingdom for us on the Kings every year, which we're so grateful for. But maybe since you left Downline staff, which I don't remember what year that would have been, 17, 14?
Yep.
Yeah, give them a quick review of the last 10 years and what you're doing now and what you did when you were on staff at Downline.
Yeah. Well, when I got there, it was a sinking ship with the emerging leaders director who was there.
Thankfully he left.
No, I graduated from Dallas Seminary in 2010 and had met Kennan Vaughn. We had taken a summer class together, had some mutual friends down there in Texas. And so some of the stuff that I had been working on in seminary with developing curricula for discipleship stuff was some of what Downline was looking to get into at that point. So this is before the Downline Builder. This is before we had, kind of the notebook binders with all the class notes and all those kinds of things. And so as Ken and I were talking, he offered for Kim and I to come up there and spend a weekend and get to see what happens with Downline. And we just kind of fell in love with it. And so we moved after I graduated. Kim had graduated from Dallas Seminary as well in 2008. And she was counseling for the state of Texas. So we moved up to Memphis in 2010. And I was on staff there for 4 years. Seems like way longer just because we loved Memphis so much, loved Downline organization and family so much. And so I felt like we put down roots, even though it was only 4 years, lots of friendships, loved our church, just such a sweet season.
You had a great first week in Memphis.
Oh yeah. First day in town, had somebody shot in my front yard while I was standing on the front porch. So there's a famous story about that. I wrote a Christianity Today article about that somebody can look up if you're interested. Hearing more about our first day shooting. But hey, what a testimony, even more so to the community there. Because even with that, it was one of our favorite places we ever lived. Sure. And really loved being there. Yeah, so that I moved there, and then on staff worked on a number of things. It was primarily curriculum development, and then teaching stuff as there was need to teach things in the institute. And then that was when we were doing a lot of kind of other campuses, Fayetteville and other places, traveling around, doing some speaking in other places, leading some of the mission trips. So went on a couple trips a year with Downline to do disciple making conferences and things, different places. But yeah, developed the binder that had the teacher and student guides. And then had, we were trying, that was kind of an in-house, right, curriculum for people who were at Downline to use. And then we started brainstorming, hey, what could we produce something that would be for the broader community, the church to use. And that's had the conceptual idea for the Downline Builder, which that was a couple years of dreaming and planning and putting that into place.
To see I remember that.
So, yeah. And then right around, I think 2013, I think was when you headed out and needed somebody to kind of fill in the emerging leaders thing. So I picked that up my last year.
According to you, we needed someone to save the program.
Yeah, sinking ship, I think, is the phrase I used.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So,
but it hadn't sunk.
No, yeah, that'd have been really bad. So up to give leadership to the emerging leaders program for that 1 year, which was a joy. And then I moved to China. So that was our exit. Still stayed involved writing curriculum here and there, especially at the begining.
And that was
as I'm back in town teaching.
6 years, 5 years, 6 years in China?
6 years in China.
6 years, yeah. Yeah, I remember we talked like week one of like the ground zero COVID outbreak while you were still boots on the ground over there.
Yeah. We were there. We were there when it happened.
So, okay. So now just quickly kind of where you and Kim are at and what you're doing. And then we're going to actually talk about which is super pertinent, just as we hope to keep equipping people as we build people into faithful followers of Jesus, obviously with God's kindness and the help of the Spirit. But kind of this, there's so much out now, secular and Christian based, on loneliness. And I think you just preached on just the idea of friendship, biblically rooted, and the importance and necessity of that. So we're going to get into some of that here in a minute, but tell everybody where you're at in the DC area and what y'all are up to.
Yeah, so I am currently an associate pastor at Delray Baptist Church up in the DC area. So we're in Alexandria. So I'm looking out my window of my office right now and see planes landing over at Reagan National. So we're right across the river from DC, and been here since 2020. We moved back from China, moved here to Delray, and I do a lot of preaching, oversee missions with a couple other brothers who are other elders, and then we kind of our elders, we all kind of wear a number of hats, and those hats may switch at different times. And so I'm overseeing currently our small group structure, which we call fellowship groups, as well as kind of some women's ministry type things. We have this thing called the Women's Advisory Board that I kind of oversee and help think through some of the women's.
I'm glad. I know Kim's thankful you have a women's advisory board.
She's on it.
Well, maybe she can tell you a lot.
That's what I need. That
you need it. Hey, so I'll tell you I'll be careful here. Jonathan Haidt, who's, at least from my impressions on reading him, would not profess to be a believer.
Right.
I think he writes from a secular advantage, but I will say, particularly as it relates to loneliness, in his book, Lost Connections, I think, even including a lot of Christian authors, he does maybe the best job I've ever seen at diagnosing a problem. He's unable to, obviously, apart from the Spirit and God's Word, to present a way forward, a meaningful way forward. But as far as diagnosing the problem goes, and one of the things he hit at is, with the rise of anxiety and depression, so many years, like, loneliness was treated as a symptom of depression. What his research has showed is it's actually the root cause of so many people's battle with depression or anxiety. And while he can't take it to the next spot of our wiring and being made in the image of a triune God and the relational necessities and all, the fact that even secular people are connecting that, hey, this is a problem. And it's more than I feel bad, I'm sad, I'm lonely. There's something deep about what it means to be human that loneliness particularly grades against. And so I'd love to hear how, because we're going to be discipling people and have people listening in the Downline community that are going to be building into others, and loneliness and a lack of friendship is going to be a real problem. It's going to need to be an area of emphasis and growth, even in disciple-making relationships. So maybe walk us through, why did you even pick to preach on that topic, as it were, now? What did you discover as you were preparing for that? And then, kind of what came out of that message?
Yeah, good questions. I feel like there's about 3 or 4 angles we could start with on this. We read, as elders, we recently read a couple books on the topic. And so we read Drew Hunter wrote a book called Made for Friendship. The relationship, and the subtitle I think for that is the relationship that halves our sorrows and doubles our joys, which I think is a J.C. Ryle quote about friendship, that it halves our sorrows and doubles our joys. So we read that as elders. And then along with that, we read a book. It's like a little pamphlet. I think TGC puts it out by a guy named, last name is Linneman, and it's called Why Do I Feel Lonely at Church?
Yeah.
So we read those together. The reason we read those together was, honestly, just because we hear about that a lot. We do a lot of, as elders here at our church, trying to shepherd our flock, or, we have rhythms of soliciting prayer requests and kind of check-ins to see how people are doing. Obviously just in relational shepherding nature and discipleship relationships and things like that. But then also we constantly at our elders meetings, which are twice a month, praying through our membership directory. We do that at our staff meetings as well. We do that during a pastoral prayer on Sunday morning. And every time we're doing that, we're send an email out, getting prayer requests, and even more than that, hey, what are some of the things that God's teaching you? Where are you struggling? Where do you think, what are some of the ways that we could be growing here as a church? And how are you helping to try to meet some of those needs? It's a whole form that people fill out whenever we're praying for them. So through that, friendship and loneliness has just been a theme that we hear a lot. And so we decided, we're always reading once a quarter, we're reading a book together as elders. And so last quarter, we read those two books together. It's not just hearing from our congregation, right? We as elders feel the same thing. We're living in the same reality and same world. And, always feel like, man, I could use more friendships or better friendships or any friendships and, can feel lonely at times and things like that. And so that's why we launched into that. And then as we've been in those conversations and as we've been talking to people, just out of curiosity, I started, because I'll see books that pop up on, much more aware of kind of the Christian publishing world and seeing books that are getting recommended to me on podcasts I listen to or whatever, things like that. And so, I know that Rebecca McLaughlin, who's been churning out a bunch of great books over the last several years, wrote a book recently called No Greater Love, A Biblical Vision for Friendship. Christine Hoover, back in 2017, Messy, Beautiful Friendship. Another author, Kelly Needham, wrote a book called Friendish in 2019, Reclaiming Real Friendship and a Culture of Confusion. I have these titles in front of me because I put these at the beginning of my sermon that I preached that you referenced. But it's just interesting. Over the last 7 years, it just seems like there's been an explosion of material on the topic, and that's just from some of the Christian publishers. So as I was preaching the sermon, I just told the church, I said, now let's cast a wider net. And I'm not endorsing any of these books. I've read none of them. And this is from non-Christian publishers, just over the last year and a half, right? So just 2023 and 2024, listen to some of these titles. How to Make Friends That Last, A Comprehensive Guide to Meeting New People and Making Friends by Paul Richter. Together, The Healing Power of Human Connection in a Sometimes Lonely World by Vivek Murthy, who Murthy, by the way, was a former U.S. Surgeon General. Let's Talk About Loneliness, The Search for Connection in a Lonely World by Simone Hung. How to Know a Person, The Art of Seeing Others Deeply and Being Deeply Seen by David Brooks. Modern Friendship, How to Nurture Our Most Valued Connections by Anna Goldfarb. The Art and Science of Connection, Why Social Health is Missing the Key to Living Longer, Happier, and Healthier by Casey Killam. The Connection Cure, The Prescriptive Power of Movement, Nature, Art, Service, and Belonging by Julia Hotz. The Age of Loneliness, Essays by Laura Maris. And then maybe most strikingly, our own government put out a book. This is in June of 2023 called Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation, the U.S. Surgeon General's Advisory on the Healing Effects of Social Connection and Community. And that's just from like a 30-minute Amazon search, right? So surely there are more. And I share all of those just to say a couple things. One, for anybody who's listening who struggles for friendship, just know like you're not alone, right? There's everybody seems to be reading and writing and thinking about friendship right now. So you're not alone. And then secondly, realize that the issue of friendship and loneliness, both our desire for friendship and our struggle with friendship, it's not, we hear this a lot in DC. Oh, it's just, you can't, DC's too fast paced. You can't, DC's the problem kind of a thing. And so I was just saying, like, DC's not the problem. It's not a Christian problem. It's not your church problem. Hey, my church is too big. My church, what I'm saying? There's all these things that we could blame. But if the solution were that simple, like, why all the books from like every corner of all the publishing worlds right now? That's right. It's just like there's something else going on that is causing everybody, Christian, non-Christian, north, south, east, west, to say we desire friendships and we need them, and we're kind of dissatisfied and we're lonely. So it's a pretty ubiquitous problem. So there's something bigger. It's got to be a human desire and a human problem. And apparently, I think some current cultural factors that are making it both desired and difficult. So that was kind of what led us. We're doing a summer series in the book of Proverbs, which kind of, lended itself nicely. We're just taking, one on anger, one on speech, one on purity, one, different topics. And so this was a good thing. As I was reading on this, I said, man, I'm going to do one of these just on friendship, looking at Proverbs on friendship. And so certainly the Bible has way more to say, Old Testament, New Testament, but we're focusing mainly on Proverbs, and just thinking about how we, as a church, must rightly value and desire and pursue healthy friendships.
Yeah.
And, connecting that to Downline, like that's a big part of our discipleship, is that, we need that. And we do talk, Drew Hunter, in his book says we talk a lot in the church about community, which is good, but we don't talk a whole lot about friendship, which is not good. And so trying to commend more, that being more in the conversation.
Well, I was even, transitioning away from Harvest out here to the Austin area, in Dripping Springs, from a 2,000 person church to a 30 person church. There's a sense in which that relational connectivity is, you almost rediscover it in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
The smaller, more pared down something gets, and yet at the same time, you can be just as lonely in a 30 person church plant as you can feeling lost in a 2,000 person congregation. And so there's a, and it's interesting, there's a degree of which, or not even a degree, where I think social media and technology has brought this burden to bear in ways that are exponentially more pervasive than they were 30 years ago, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Because the sense of loneliness that comes from, being known by everyone or having an online, visibly online, or an Instagram friend or a Facebook friend or whatever it is, when you realize you're not actually known, you may know more people, but the depth of your loneliness is that much more stinging when you realize you're actually exposed to more people than ever before, while also feeling lonelier than you ever did before.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I feel for, even now, I mean, we're in our 40s. I mean, you're much older than me. You don't have hair. I've got more. But
I look at least 10 years older than you.
Minimum. Yeah, I'd say minimum. But like, how thankful I am that we were on that wave before, smart technology came out. And things that were normal ways of connecting with each other were so ingrained, I think, in our generation, it's served as like a common grace of the Lord to help fight against some of this stuff. Not that we're immune to it, but I feel even more so for the generations behind us that have even those baseline connectivities as kids in the neighborhood, going to school, whatever. You go to lunch now and see a bunch of high schoolers, they don't even look at each other. And so I think what we're talking about now, it's not a quick and easy fix. This is now sown deeply into generations. We're going to be combating this, I think, from this point moving forward.
Yeah, I think you're right. Obviously, and I wonder. I don't know if I have an answer to this, but it does make you wonder, like, who's got the deeper ache. I think we all have that ache, and I could talk about that more in a second. But those of us and our generation who remember what it was like before.
Yeah, you've tasted
or those who have never, this is just the water you've swam in your entire life.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think there's a different kind of ache for each person. And I do think you mentioned Jonathan Haidt earlier, and I was listening to an interview with Jonathan Haidt, and he was talking about his latest book, The Anxious Generation. And obviously anybody who's familiar with that book, he's looking at social media and smartphone technology, and how that has rewired childhood and led to mental illness in a very striking and unique way currently. And again, as you said, that was a good caveat earlier. Doesn't seem to be a believer. We have some very different worldview assumptions and conclusions, those kinds of things. But he does, in that book, he outlines a number of harms. I think he has like 4 harms, specific harms that emerge for teenagers because of smartphone usage. And his first one that he mentions is social deprivation. And as I was listening to him, and this is around the same time I was reading the Drew Hunter book on friendship and the Linneman book on friendship, but I was listening to this interview with him, and he's talking about the average amount of time that 15 to 24-year-olds spent with their friends each day in 2023 was 2.5 hours. By 2019, it was about 40 minutes. Many people, and even then, it's almost always, a lot of it's just through the phone. Kids have seen a steady drop in the number of friends since the 1990s. He was saying percentage of kids who report feeling lonely has increased since the 1990s, and so on. And he says that the evidence seems pretty clear that our online presence and our social media and our phones have something to do with the epidemic of loneliness. And as I was listening to that, to hate, my first reaction was like, yeah, kids these days, like, I can't believe these kids. And, there is, because that's the point he's making. He's talking about the rewiring of childhood.
Yeah.
And that's the point he's making. And there is a significant and unique impact on kids and teens. But then I'm like, wait a minute, like, early 2000s, the rest of us, it's not like we're immune just because we didn't go through puberty with this stuff. I've still had the same thing in my pocket for 10 to 15 years. And that certainly hasn't made, even those in their 30s, 40s, and 50s immune to the impacts.
Oh, no.
And so,
dude, I'm going to tell you right now, some of the most addicted people to Facebook and like phone games are our generation and older.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and so that's what that was one of the things, because again, depends on where listeners are who are listening to this. People are it's gonna be easy to kind of make a boogeyman out of various things for why you feel lonely. It could be the size of your church, it could be the fast-paced nature of where you live. I was teaching a men's retreat several months ago for a church over in Maryland, and it was a Q&A, and this topic came up, and there was somebody who was kind of one of the guys asking the Q&A. I could tell he was kind of hinting around the idea that he may be thinking about leaving and looking for another church because it's been hard to form friendships. I was just saying, listen, like, now, granted, churches can do better or worse jobs of helping people navigate that and think about that,
that's
right? But like, it's not as easy as just saying, hey, my church is this size, and so that's why I can't form friendships.
Mm-hmm.
So, or like, I live in the DC area, and that's why I can't form friendships. And so on that point I'm like, listen, if you're on your phone constantly and you're on social media constantly, like, please don't blame the DC area for your friendship struggle. Please don't blame your large church for your friendship struggle. I see why that's tempting, but it's just a smokescreen. Mm-hmm. That can't be it. Our tech can be used to serve our friendships, but when we allow it to become a substitute for friendship, we're isolating ourselves. And that was one of the Proverbs that I think is really helpful. Is Proverbs chapter 18 verse 1 says, "Whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire."
Oh yeah.
He breaks out against all sound judgment. And obviously, right now in 2024, we had this massive global pandemic where, there was a lot of isolation that took place, even if you didn't desire it. There was, or even if you were fighting against it, like, people may have been isolated from you. Like, there's just a lot of isolation. And so that, we just have to realize that was a thing. And we're all, because of that, digging ourselves out of a friendship hole that we've all been in. But it's not just COVID. Like, that wasn't the only culprit. And because this was happening before then, it's hitting everybody. And so, that proverb, I think one of the interesting observations there is that it's not a very passive way that Solomon says it, right? So whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against all sound judgment. Mm-hmm. So there certainly are situations like COVID-19 where we may have been caused to be isolated, but there's so many other ways that we isolate ourselves, that we are intentionally making decisions. And whether that's like, I'm isolating myself, by just not putting myself out there and not pursuing friendships, or by just going completely virtual with everything. Like, that's an isolating of yourself.
Well, which I was going to say that there's a complexity there too, because there are ways to be with people in person. So, for example, let's say I go to dinner, whatever, you, me, Shannon, Kim, we all go to dinner. You pay, obviously. Mm-hmm. I spend 90% of the dinner asking questions so that I'm never asked anything in return. Mm. Well, on surface, I mean, that looks like taking a ton of interest in someone else, right?
Yeah.
But even that in of itself, to never even allow space for someone to ask things of you in return, it's another manifestation of there's an insulation or an isolation happening there that's dressed up like taking interest in others. That's where the depth of this, we have to slow down at some point and ask some really probing questions.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, among the probing questions that are helpful for us to ask as Christians, again, so bringing it back out of the, hey, everybody's commenting on this part of the conversation and thinking about, how do we think about friendship as Christians? One of the really helpful things for me from Drew Hunter's book was he has a chapter called The Edenic Ache. And it was really, it was one of those obvious things that, it's right there in plain text in front of you. But, when God created Eve, he wasn't just solving a marriage problem or a spouse problem. He was solving a loneliness, an aloneness problem. And so he was creating, he was creating a spouse.
Yeah, it's the only thing in Genesis commented on is not good, right?
That's right. Yeah. And we always hear that, especially now. I mean, we're recording this coming out of the summer and, been to a bunch of weddings and, we always hear that portion of scripture commented on at weddings, about, it wasn't good. So he created Eve. So now you got a wife. But again, that's true. But, again, God's not solving a spouse problem. He's solving an aloneness problem. Not just that Adam didn't have a wife, but that he was alone. And it was a friend problem as well. And so that's why Hunter in his book calls it the Edenic ache. Friendship just it's not just an optional, thing, an optional theme in life, but part of what it means to be human. So friendship is a true necessity in life. And so, that's why we need friendships. That's why it's not, okay, it's an extrovert thing, or that's okay, if I have enough time after all my other stuff kind of a thing. No, we're actually created for it. We are created for friendship. So you can go to Eden, and then I think the reason we have the ache in Eden, and you alluded to this earlier in the intro, is that even before that, in the Trinity itself, there's eternal friendship and relationship. Like that capacity for and desire for and ability for friendship and relationship isn't just a part of creation. It's before creation. It's who God is. And that's why I think we yearn for it and we long for it, and why it's a necessity of what it means to be human, is that God, created us in his image. And so, your desire for friendship isn't a bug in the system. It's a function of the system. I heard Tim Keller one time say, the less you want friends, the less like God you are.
Oh, wow. I've never heard that quote. That's a great statement.
Yeah.
All right. So we have, I think, not exhaustively, but the problem is right in front of us. It's pretty clear. It's intrinsic to humanity. We could keep talking about that. That's theologically, philosophically true. Now we need to move a little bit towards, well, so what? Like, there's a reality that God has something to say about it. And we, as Christ followers, we have a lot of power in the sense we're indwelt by the Spirit. We are human, to engage with one another and to be the solution to such a pervasive problem for one another. And there are a lot of layers to that. And that's what we're going to do in the next episode. So, Jason, thanks for being here.
Yeah, man.
Come back next week. You want to hear part 2 as we try to walk through what do we do now in light of this reality.